All
Hey,
right.
Jennifer, look at you in your Duke outfit. Jennifer's son just got accepted, right, to dive at Duke.
Ooh, all right.
Yeah.
We're excited about that. Well, today we are probably not going on Facebook Live because we are in Summerville, North Carolina. Mount Airy,
North Carolina.
We're 422.5 miles in our journey from 5 a.m. this morning, and we have how many miles? 816 miles to go to arrive in Lake Placid. So we look really fresh for today.
Bill leaning back.
Yeah, we look really good.
Really important.
And we got the grandkids. I don't know if y'all can see them. Say
All
hi.
right.
Hi.
Full house.
All right, full house.
So it's really important that people reach out and make sure that they tell people because we're not Facebook Live. I appreciate it if you could let everybody know to go to Facebook, the video, right?
We'll get it out.
Yeah.
All right, so Josh, why don't you kick us off?
Yes, great. All right. Hello, everybody. Happy Monday. Happy official summer now. So as we kick off the first Intrepid Spirits Huddle, as we get into the summer, got a few housekeeping items. So as always and every week, we've got a great guest speaker today. So please, as we are going through the episode here, please send any comments, feedback, or questions that we can ask, and we will start asking those throughout and then at the end. So please do share. Also, head to the Facebook page so that you can see everybody who has been viewing the Intrepid Spirits Huddles and connect with them. This is a place where we encourage the connection because we know things go so fast here. So please do go to the Facebook page and share with your friends. You know, we're trying to build a larger group here. So we've had some amazing speakers in the last few weeks and the next few weeks coming up as well, along with Thomas Grant today. I know everybody's going to look forward to hearing this discussion. So with that said, look for the recording online, share with your friends, and glad you're here. So over to Susan and Dill for the opening huddle.
Hi there, hi gang. I want to just really, first of all, thank everybody. I don't know what's happening, but it's nuts that the Dillisms and my little videos are getting like 1,000+ peaks, I guess, or whatever. And I thank you for that. I think it sounds like people are liking them. The sea is dangerous and storms are terrible, but these have never been sufficient reasons to remain ashore. Unlike timid souls, intrepid spirits seek victory over those things that seem impossible. It is with an iron will that they meet the shadowy future without fear and conquer the unknown. I'll give a quick thought starter here today. And it's this. Tom Grant is one of my dearest buddies that I met at ABAC, and we've become very, very close. We spar a lot on a lot of things, and it really has been a fantastic 10-year relationship so far. And I think that you'll really enjoy him. And I encourage you to reach out to him afterwards if there's any questions. The guy is one of the most serious, I believe, media guys in the country, and very, very well respected. So without that, and oh, by the way, at 12:30 sharp, we got to head out because we're facing 12 more hours at least of pushing up the highway. So well, we could respect that time, that'd be great today. And thank you very much. Sunshine?
Okay, so if you notice the lady on the Intrepid Spirits quote, Catherine Graham, there's a movie called The Post, and it's about her a significant decision that she made for the Washington Post to print the Pentagon Papers. So she was definitely an intrepid spirit in her day, especially when there were no females, I don't think, Tom, in running a newspaper at the time, right? Much less any type of media. So definitely a intrepid spirit. We had her today because the next 2 weeks we're going to be talking to some of journalists of our times today. And Dr. Grant, like Jill said, is a really dear friend of ours, award-winning investigative journalist. When the media started becoming more sensationalism than true journalism, he decided to get his PhD and give back to the world. And so we met him at ABAC when we were teaching there. And we're very honored and blessed to have such a talent teaching our young children in South Georgia about journalism, but not just about journalism. His PhD really focused on ethics in media. And so he's teaching hopefully a young generation about how to be ethical in their reporting and journalism. So, and then next week is going to be another dear, dear friend of mine, Candace Presley. She is responsible for community relations for Cox Media, but she went to Cox right out of college, and she's been a reporter. She was the president of the Black American Journalism Society. So just a very, very influential person in her own right. So we're going to hear from her next week. But with that, Dr. Grant, take it away.
First, thank you very much. I want to thank Dylan and Susan for asking me to speak here, because they're incredible people who have done so much for the world, and I'm proud to call them my friends. So thank you for inviting me here. Now, I'm going to share the screen for a couple pictures here, but they asked me to talk to you about fake news, and sadly, it's not a new phenomenon. This is my first encounter with fake news. It came when I was about 10 years old in the mid-1960s. And this is when a billboard appeared on a rural highway in Washington State where I grew up. And that billboard essentially said, Martin Luther King is a communist. Now, that was not true. King had long said that communism was incompatible with Christianity, and the picture wasn't of a communist school. It was the Highlander Folk School in Tennessee, which was a pro-union and pro-civil rights center where people committed the additional sin of interracial square dancing. However, those billboards, paid for by an arm of the John Birch Society, sprang up around the nation, including in my rural western county. And like most fake news, it played to our prejudices and our fears, in this case, our fears of communism and integration. Other fake news appeals to fear based in race, religion, sexuality, and maybe you've heard of yellow journalism, which dates to coverage leading up to the Spanish-American War in 1898. Now, this is a newspaper illustration of a fake news article that helped inflame public sentiment for that war. It was an American woman supposedly strip searched by these swarthy Spanish men because they thought she was a spy. Now, that strip search never happened. But, when an explosion destroyed the USS Maine in Havana Harbor, newspapers inflamed sentiment that the Spanish had murdered hundreds of American soldiers. Now, to this day, no one knows if it was really a Spanish mine that sunk the ship or whether it was an accident on board the ship. But with the inflamed news of the day, the nation went to war. And you may, in your lifetime, remember this. A 15-year-old Kuwaiti girl testified to Congress in the early 90s, televised live and covered with little skepticism, that Iraqi soldiers had entered a Kuwaiti hospital and killed babies. Now, that testimony propelled America into the first Gulf War. And it was only later that we discovered that the girl was the daughter of a Kuwaiti ambassador, and that she was put forward to give false testimony by a large US public relations firm. Now, today, you face fake news every day. On Father's Day on Facebook, in just a few minutes, I counted on my Facebook feed 2 clear instances of fake news on my feed and many biased representations. Now, I put corrections in the comments. I don't expect anybody's ever going to read those comments, however. Today, more than half the people in America get their news over social media, and of course, they just read the headlines for the most part. I want to say that's kind of like getting all your news over the backyard fence from Mr. Smith, who we used to call the neighborhood gossip. Now, every news source literally lines up at your backyard fence. When I was a kid, news used to come in through the front door. there was a daily newspaper delivered to your doorstep, or in your living room, there was a nightly newscast. But now, the local newspaper, the national news networks, the public relations companies, the political activists, the Russians, the Chinese, the John Birch Society, and every other troll, gossipy neighbor, or would-be influencer in the world is lined up at your backyard fence. And you really can't tell any of them apart. They each get the same amount of space. They each get to pick their own pictures and put their own logos on there. It's as though all of those news sources were equal. And in the so-called marketplace of ideas or marketplace of truth, you, the consumer, are required to make reasonable decisions about what is true or reliable and what's not. Now, we should ask ourselves if this marketplace is really working. I mean, if we applied it to another kind of marketplace, let's say a marketplace for restaurants, would you like to know what's going on in the kitchen before you go into that restaurant? Would you like that restaurant kitchen to be inspected before you eat there? Or what about with pharmaceuticals? Would you rather they test the drugs before they give them to you? Or with planes, would you rather that planes be inspected and that people who are going to board the plane along with you are screened by security? Well, somehow we expect that truth and information doesn't need any kind of screening like that. Yet the purpose of journalism is to inform people so they can make reasoned decisions about their lives and communities. And that information needs to be reliable. We call that reasoned decisions about lives and communities democracy. So if we don't trust our restaurants and our airplanes to the free market, why do we trust democracy to Mr. Smith and all the other people at the backyard fence that we call social media? Indeed, why do we do that when we know that many of those people are liars and trolls who are merely trying to distort our view of the world? Historically, journalists had this primary duty. Their primary duty was to verify. Or when I was a young journalist, they told me, you can only print what is provably true. Now, provably true, that's a pretty high standard. And when I went to work in TV, I learned about a new standard. In TV, we had a duty to be fair. It was called the Fairness Doctrine, and it was a national ruling that required all holders of broadcast licenses to present issues of public importance in a manner that was honest, equitable, and balanced. Now, those duties no longer exist in our world of social media. The Fairness Doctrine was eliminated by Reagan in the late 80s, and under federal law, websites and social media platforms cannot be sued if their users publish lies, even if those lies constitute actual libel or slander. The websites and social platforms are protected. And I want to suggest that there is another complicating factor. 50 years ago, it was pretty easy for us to tell what was news and what was opinion. In my newspaper, there were separate pages in the newspaper. You had the news section, you had the opinion section, and then the sports section and the comics, and you knew which was which. When you went to the TV, the news was presented in a certain half hour or hour around dinner time, and then you had entertainment. But cable news, when it went 24 hours in the 90s, and when News Talk took over all the radio airwaves, we began to confuse news with this thing called analysis, which is really opinion. Talking heads began to spout opinions with the same vigor as they did the facts. And it wasn't just a national phenomenon. We saw it in local TV too. Local TV tried to capture the Oprah and Dr. Phil and Maury viewers by running these salacious, gossipy stories in their newscasts at 5 o'clock, right after those talk shows. And it became impossible for people to tell what was news and what wasn't. When it comes to social media, it's now this indistinguishable mix of like personal narratives, of advertising, of persuasion, and news. And almost none of that news is given to you without some kind of comment. And in the last 6 years, it's gotten even more dangerous because fake news has been scientifically weaponized over the past 6 years. And I use that term, weaponized. These days, anyone in the world can lob missiles at American democracy in the form of fake news. And people can even get paid to do so. One guy in Macedonia in 2016 says he made $2,500 a day from Google ads on his fake news websites. However, the best known case is Cambridge Analytica, which harvested data from 87 million Facebook profiles, then created a set of records, a data set with hundreds of data points on individual voters. Then they targeted individuals with this highly personalized advertising that was based on the personality traits of people on Facebook, and it was designed to inflame them. Now, they did not target everyone. They only targeted people who were the most volatile, those who scored highly on what they called the dark triad: Machiavellianism, psychopathy, and narcissism. Cambridge Analytica would then engage those who exhibited these dark triad traits, I'm quoting here, introducing narratives via Facebook groups, ads, and articles that the firm knew from internal testing were likely to inflame these very narrow segments of people with these traits. Now, they basically fed false narratives based on people's inner demons and then expected those people to run with them, which they did. They even not only ran with them on Facebook, but they showed up with guns at pizza parlors looking for political pedophile rings in the basement. So who did Cambridge Analytica work for? Well, it worked for Steve Bannon in America, but it also worked for the Russians and for various entities in the Middle East and Africa. Now, in my opinion, those were not people or entities that were out to protect democracy. Instead, they were out to undermine it. So Susan asked me, she says, how are we supposed to separate fake news from real news? Well, in my research, I've been doing this for a few years. In America, they give you the standard answer. You are supposed to educate yourself and do your own fact checking. You're supposed to check the source, click through, look at the real URL of the website, not the fake ABC or World News logo. You're supposed to look up the story itself on other external websites like Snopes or PolitiFact. I do this quite commonly, actually. You're supposed to read the entire story, not just the clickbait headline. And you're supposed to check the date because some stories are recycled at different times to distort the meaning. But what I suggest that that's doing is it's essentially shifting the cost of fake news, the cost of the truth, finding the truth to you, and doing nothing to stop the proliferation of fake news. If each of Facebook's, for the imaginations, if each of Facebook's 2.6 billion users was expected to spend 5 minutes a day checking the accuracy of their stories on their feeds, and they were paid the minimum wage for that time, the value of that fact checking would be $1.5 billion a day. Now, I personally think that the people who provide you that news should be responsible for that fact checking. I personally think social media needs to be regulated. And just as we check the kitchen of a restaurant for its ability to store food at a safe temperature and prepare it with clean products, we should expect social media to keep its own house clean. People will say that I oppose free speech, and no, I just think that any entity that makes $70 or $80 billion a year through targeted advertising sales based on its deep knowledge of who you are and on the stream of information that it carries to you, has a significant responsibility for the information that it's sending out, just like newspapers do and broadcasters do. And I think the consequence of doing nothing could be very dangerous. Now, I'm going to return to that. Remember that billboard that was in my county, that false billboard about Martin Luther King? Well, the same people who put up that billboard also promoted a false story in my county about a rancher, saying that he was a communist and a Jew. Now, he sued because he wasn't a communist and he wasn't a Jew either, but he sued and he won. But the false story that was created and was continued to be perpetuated by certain groups on the right, that false story resulted 20 years later on Christmas Eve, 1985, in a man going to a home in Seattle where he murdered the son of that rancher, who at that time was a civil rights attorney, and murdered his wife and murdered their 2 children. He was one of those people in the dark triad, the psychopathic, narcissistic, Machiavellian people who believe stories still being spread that the family was communist and Jewish, which they were not. And that's what worries me today, that the seeds of lies that we plant today will sprout even more evil tomorrow. So what do we do? What do you do? My first suggestion is that you approach every story on social media with incredible patience, not skepticism, but patience. You know, it's this town gossip, Mr. Smith telling it to you over a fence. So you don't have to repeat it. You don't have to act on it. You don't have to go out and buy more toilet paper or circle of wagons. You can wait a couple of days at least. And by then, if it is important, you'll know if it's important, and you'll have a better perspective on the truth. What the town gossip tells you over the fence for free is not being delivered to you in your interest. It's being delivered to you in their interest, despite what they say. And just because it wears the face of Mr. Smith, that does not mean that's what really is. It may be that behind the face of Mr. Smith, or behind the person who fed that to Mr. Smith, is a Russian troll or a psychopathic, narcissistic Machiavellian who has been manipulated to spread fake news by people whose primary goal is to disrupt our ability to govern ourselves. Now, my second suggestion is that you pay for your news. I mean, we have begun to think that news is free, but if you want to know the truth, pay a news organization that hires journalists to verify what they print. And don't trust those who merely aggregate the sources that fit their point of view. Now, the Wall Street Journal, generally to the right, the New York Times, generally to the left, and other paid outlets of news are much more likely to give you information you can rely on. And third, I think you should support regulation of social media and internet giants like Facebook, Twitter, Google, and Amazon. Amazon, by the way, was deeply involved in how Cambridge Analytica managed to get all that data. Fake news threatens to undermine democracy. It's not just a little problem for me trying to figure out what's true or not. It's really undermining how we decide how our country should run. And even though I believe deeply in a free speech, I also believe even more deeply in a couple values. They're called truth and fairness. So thank you for this time and allowing me to speak. And if you have any questions, I am available.
Yeah, we've got some questions. Josh, you want to read them out?
Fire away, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to hear this one. And Thomas, thank you. So first question here is, and could be impossible, but can you rank the current national news services as far as percent of fake news? So I think we'd all love to hear your opinion on that one.
You know, I mean, okay, so if we're talking about national news services, you can be, okay, it doesn't matter, even, you know, whether it be Fox News or whether it be CNN or whether it be the evening news, if they are giving you news, and if you can tell that it's news, they have vetted that news. In other words, they are doing their best to make sure it is provably true. On the other hand, if it's CNN or Fox or even NBC or whatever, if they are giving you analysis, that is speculation. And so virtually all of our national news services engage in a bunch of that. So if you're reading the opinion page of the New York Times, that's speculation. If you're reading their news articles, they are doing their best to make sure that is the truth. Now, they may select certain facts, and that's why if you're, you know, the Wall Street Journal might select some different facts. But I will tell you, one of my friends worked on the Wall Street Journal's opinion page, and she used to cuss out those people, what she called the front page people, who always gave a different version of the truth than what she thought it was. So even within the newspaper, there may be different views of what's true. But I will tell you that the front page people, the news people, are working diligently to try and give you the truth.
Got you. Okay, great answer. All right, moving down the list, have a few more here. Question from Jennifer. How did they determine who exhibited the dark triad traits?
Well, okay, so what they did was they used this was very scientific. They got $20 million from a rich guy from America, I can't remember his name, who funded them, and they used psychologists to test a bunch of people with I think it was 150 or 120 question personality profile, and that's how they gathered this information for the to get those 87 million Facebook things. They only actually had to pay for a few 100,000 of them or people, because every time they then scraped somebody's Facebook feed, they scraped up everybody's friends as well. So they would get 300, 500 people every time for every one that they paid to do this profile. And then they figured out, based on what people's likes and dislikes were and all the data that Facebook had collected, that, who fit those dark triad, perspectives or characteristics. It was, it was a very scientific enterprise. It's the guy who was the whistleblower for Cambridge Analytica has outlined how they did it, and it's a fascinating read.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. Next question up from Tim. Are there any mainstream media outlets that display traits of a propagandist rather than journalism?
Well, listen, what do you want to call it propaganda? So propaganda is this notion you're trying to perpetuate false narratives, and certainly some places want a narrative to be perpetuated. Is it you have to decide whether it's false or not. So certainly within our country, up until the 80s, somebody like Fox News wouldn't have been able to promote its agenda quite as strongly as it does. And conversely, the same thing with MSNBC. They wouldn't have been able to perpetuate the other side of it, because they would have been required by the fairness doctrine to try and present both sides. But after the 80s, nobody had to present both sides. They could present only one side. And once again, you have to distinguish between when they're presenting news and when they're presenting, analysis or opinion. They like to call it analysis because it's really, they're just speculating about things. And most of our cable news these days, or certainly most of our news talk radio, is filled up with people who are just analyzing things and then telling you, speculating about what they think.
Yeah, very interesting. Final question here. I think we can squeeze this one in from Twig. What is the Epoch Times?
What is the Epoch Times? I don't know. I'd have to Google it right now because, frankly, it is not on my list of trusted news sources. Although, who knows? It might be. I might have to look it up. Okay. The Epoch Times. It's like if I haven't read a hard copy of it or seen it, I really have to go look it up some other place, and maybe I should look it up on Snopes.
Gotcha.
All right. Well, great. Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to close out, but we will put the answers to the questions we didn't answer on our blog. It'll come out to everybody that registered on the email, and it'll also be on Intrepid Spirits. And Dill, you have any closing?
Yeah, the closing thing for me is I think I don't think this is fake news. And as y'all know, I'm a motorsports guy, and I'm very wary, upset, pissed off, whatever the right word is, about the noose in Bubba Wallace's garage in Talladega yesterday. And I'll be very curious. I'm going to be driving today to see the race at 3 o'clock to hear what transpires. But I think you're seeing a sport that has absolutely made a stand against racism and the Confederate flag. And I think it's going to be interesting for all of us to watch that, because it's really the first professional league that has had to really, their fans are protesting. I mean, it's an interesting thing to watch. And I'd say, hey, take a look and see what you think. And I look forward to hearing some thoughts from everybody next week. And thank you so much for being on the team. And like I said, let's make sure we let everybody know, because I know there's a lot of people that normally have 150 people on the Facebook Live, and we weren't able to do it today. So I feel bad about that. And Tom, thank you so much. And it says here we're going to get there at 1:02 a.m. So I got to get out of here. The old man's got to try to stay awake for the next 13 hours behind the wheel. Anyway, Hip, hip, hooray! Hip, hip, hooray! Hip, hip, hooray!
Bye,
Look forward to
guys.
seeing you all next week. We'll be on the porch. We'll have it all set up. Thank you.